Hello, everybody. I'm Jillian Sakovits. A very warm welcome to Full Time. It is presented by Amazon Prime. I'll be your host today for this edition of Full Time. You're maybe used to my voice on the bookends of the week for our full-time show, but Meg Linehan is taking a much-deserved little bit of time off as she spends time with her brand new baby. Meg, congratulations. Sending you all of our love. Big hugs. We'll try to hold it down here for you. On the show today, we are going continental. It is time to talk about the Concacaf W Champions Cup. You may or may not remember it, and it's all good. We have got you covered. This is the tournament that features clubs from North and Central America and the Caribbean, and its second edition returns this week. We will have a feature interview for you with Concacaf's General Secretary, Filippe Moggio. Tamerra Griffin speaks to him about what the Confederation's vision is for the tournament, what role does this tournament play in growing the women's club game in the region, and how important it is to increase the prize money and revenue. Who better to help me kick this show off than the one and only Tamerra Griffin? Hello, Tamerra.
Hi, Jill. How's it going?
Good, thank you. I'm very excited because I feel like it was just months ago that we saw Gotham FC kind of get their good vibes back, lifting the Concacaf W Champions Cup. And for a lot of fans, they were excited, but a lot of them, after an inaugural year of this tournament, were like, cool, what is that? And that is exactly the questions we're going to answer today. So before this tournament kicks off in year two, beginning this week, can you give us the Tamerra Griffin 101 of the Concacaf W Champions Cup?
So the Concacaf W Champions Cup, understandable questions, especially as we all honestly struggle to keep track of all the different competitions happening, not just in this region, but all over the world. So I'm also really excited that we're doing this episode. But this is the very high level landscape, and we'll get a little bit deeper. This tournament has 10 teams competing in two groups of 5. So if you watch the CONMEBOL tournament that just happened this past summer/winter, similar format. In Group A, we have the Orlando Pride, Pachuca, Club America, Alajuelense from Costa Rica, and Chorillo from Panama. And then in Group B, we have Gotham FC, the Washington Spirit, of course, NWSL, Monterrey, Vancouver Rise, who we will get to. They're an amateur team in Canada, and Alianza from El Salvador. So those are the 10 teams competing. These are some of the best teams across the CONCACAF region. You'll notice that there is not any Caribbean representation, which we will also get to later in this episode. I'm just letting you know that we have not forgotten about the Caribbean. And the tournament format, Jill, is also pretty unique. The group stage matches began this week. 4 matches, 2 home and 2 away for each team, played across 5 weeks. August to October. And then, Jill, there is a massive break from group stage. We're skipping knockouts, going straight to semifinals. 216 days from the end of the group stages. So the biggest break I've ever heard of in a regional tournament. And it raises, of course, a lot of questions around how different these teams might look between the group stage and semifinal stage of this competition. But it will basically not be resuming until next year.
Halfway through next year when a lot of these leagues are in a whole new season.
Exactly. And as we saw with Gotham, who lifted the inaugural Champions Cup in May for a tournament that started in 2024. It's going to be a similar kind of format. But the semifinals are Final Four style, single location between May 20th and 23rd, 2026 in a location that is yet to be determined. And then the winner of this W Champions Cup between 2025 and 2026 will then go on to play in the FIFA Women's Club World Cup in 2028. So there's a lot at stake here, especially because, again, we're talking about another inaugural competition with the Club World Cup coming in a few years. But that is sort of the landscape of this competition. And of course, you know, for NWSL teams, we've been hearing throughout the season that so many of these teams are eager to play. That's what Gotham said last season when they won this tournament. And I think that has remained the case. But this tournament is going to look very different for each of these different teams competing. It means something different. There's prize money, of course, nearly $500,000 at stake, which could mean, that can change a club's trajectory no matter which club we're talking about here.
So the winner gets $500,000.
Exactly. Yeah. And so then we have to get into travel because there is a lot of travel. I mentioned each team plays 2 home games and 2 away. Shout out to Theo for pulling these numbers. But the longest trip, 3,841 miles. Alianza will travel from San Salvador to Vancouver on October 16th to play them. And then after Alianza, the Orlando Pride are traveling 3,684 miles from Orlando to Peñanome, Panama on September 16th. The Pride have also 2 NWSL home games on either side of that trip to play Chorillos. So in addition to everything else we've mentioned, these players are going to be racking up miles. And I actually remember talking to some NWSL players from the last edition of this tournament about how they were going to be using those miles in the off season when they are finally able to take vacation. But there's a lot happening in this tournament. It's really showing the expansiveness, I think, of this region.
Absolutely. And there's always something to be said when you have to travel outside of the NWSL stadiums, the MLS stadiums, whatever it might be, and head to other countries with, as we've seen this whole summer, other climates, different surfaces, different care levels for those surfaces. So it will be interesting to see what these NWSL clubs will be up against. There's one NWSL club I want to just discuss in Gotham FC, being the inaugural winners. Their manager, Juan Carlos Amaro, said it's always, so important and impressive and historic to be that team, to get that first trophy. What type of stamp, Tamerra, do you feel that Gotham FC put on this very, very young tournament?
I think, and I'm coming at this, of course, from a more U.S.-centered bias, but I do think in terms of visibility, it does help that the inaugural winners of this tournament came from probably the most recognizable league in Concacaf in the NWSL. Certainly you can make an argument about Liga MX Femenil, but I also think it was great that in order to win that tournament, Gotham had to play Tigres from Liga MX Femenil. I think that really displays the brightest possibilities within CONCACAF at the club level. And I think given that Gotham has also had recent success as 2023 NWSL champions, and are having an interesting season, and I think were even at the time that they won this inaugural Concacaf W Champions Cup. I think as far as a club, it did wonders for their confidence. I remember the word confidence being used a lot after that championship game. And I even think now, given where they are in the NWSL table, there's a lot of confidence points that could potentially be gained from this tournament. But it's huge. I think that this is a club that has always wanted the international smoke, so to speak. They are always scheduling international games in their preseasons, off seasons. They had their preseason in Spain this year. They want to travel, and they want to sort of show themselves as an international brand, as an international club. And so I can imagine that even from that standpoint of the motivation of continuing to qualify for this tournament, especially as its first ever winners, it's all there for Gotham.
Well, the continental smoke is here. It's here and it's ready for Gotham FC.
Totally.
Tamerra, thank you so much.
Always.
Hit us up if you have more questions about the Concacaf Women's Champions Cup, or there's anything else you want us to talk about on Full Time, then please reach out. Send us an email at fulltime@theathletic.com, or you can always just slide into those DMs. We're on Instagram or TikTok at TA Fulltime. And while you're over there on our social media channels, please follow us. Don't go anywhere, though, because we've got Tamerra's interview with Filippe Moggio, the General Secretary of CONCACAF.
All right. I am very excited to be joined by the General Secretary of CONCACAF, Filippe Moggio. Filippe, thank you so much for joining us. How's it going? Busy times over there in CONCACAF.
Busy times. It's great to be with you today, Tamerra. Great to be here with the show. And yes, it's incredibly busy time for CONCACAF, particularly on the club competition side.
Yeah, and that's part of why we're here today. So, just for people who may not be super familiar with this tournament, this is only its second year in existence. Let's sort of lay the groundwork. Can you explain what were sort of the motivating factors for CONCACAF to create the W Champions Cup?
Absolutely. So we're heading into the second edition of the W Champions Cup. And it really was a fantastic tournament all around. I think it really highlighted the talent that exists across the entire region. It has given the countries where we have amateur leagues or we don't have professional environments trying to develop those environments. We have we're identifying talent through this competition, and I think we're giving the top leagues in the region, so NWSL, Liga MX Femenil, the opportunity to compete against each other and continue to fuel that rivalry that is building between them, and really crown regional supremacy through this competition. So heading into the second edition, we have a total of 10 teams. We
I
have
wanted to ask you about
three
that.
from the NWSL. We have three from Liga MX Femenil. We have a club from Panama, from Costa Rica, also from El Salvador, and one from Canada to complete the two groups of five. And those teams will play a total of 4 matches in the group stage during this fall, 2 at home and 2 away. And then the top 2 of each group will advance to the championship next spring at the end of May, a Final Four event, which will be placed in a centralized location to again crown the winner of the competition.
I really appreciate you breaking that down because, like I said, I think during the first iteration of this tournament, people were sort of tangentially aware. There's so much to keep track of across global women's football. But of course, I'm sure the hope is that with each iteration of this tournament, the familiarity, the recognition will only continue to expand. But Filippe, I wanted to back up just a little bit and learn more about sort of the thinking behind the way that you created the brackets for this tournament. You mentioned the 10 teams. What was sort of the thinking behind that? It reminds me a little bit of CONMEBOL, which we also just finished, the 2 groups of 5. What was sort of the thinking behind the way that you created the groups for this tournament and also the avenues for these teams to advance through the tournament?
Of course. So I think taking a step back, just talking about CONCACAF and our commitment to women's football, right? If we go back to 2019, when we first launched our women's football strategy, and the commitment there was certainly to focus on a lot of the development aspect of the sport, creating more opportunities for our member associations to compete more often. And so on the national team side, we developed a system of competitions for a 4-year cycle, which culminated in our inaugural W Gold Cup, which was played last year in 2024, which I know you covered. Thank you for doing that. And it went incredibly well. And in the back of that competition and cycle, we have now developed a new 4-year cycle of competition, again, on the national team side, which actually starts this fall with the qualification for the FIFA World Cup in 2027. And we'll then move on to the W Championship, which is where the actual teams will be determined who advances to the World Cup in 27. And then in the back of that, for the second part of the cycle, we have a Women's Nations League and the second edition of our W Gold Cup. We have 41 members, and we need to provide opportunities for all of them to compete on a more consistent basis across a 4-year cycle around all of the FIFA windows. And we saw in the first cycle the benefits that created. We had 6 teams from CONCACAF qualify to the World Cup in Australia and New Zealand. And that was the first time ever. We had teams like Haiti and Panama qualifying for the first time representing CONCACAF, which was unbelievable. Along with that was the creation of a regional club competition. We hadn't had that in the past. We recognized the importance of doing so, even without necessarily FIFA having a Club World Cup to qualify into. All the CONCACAF competitions qualify into that, but we did need to provide our leagues and clubs across our region the opportunity to compete on a regional basis in official competitions. And that was the genesis of creating this competition. The reason why it's 10 teams is because we need to look at the professional environments across our region and ensure that we have the right level of development happening. So we have a balance between Mexico and US, the top two leagues in our region, having 3 teams being represented, and then across the other professional leagues that we have in the region, and some amateur getting to professional, the opportunity to play in this competition, and hence a total of 10 teams, 2 groups of 5, and then from there advancing to the semifinals and finals, which is played in a centralized location.
Thank you for explaining that. And sticking with that topic, I think one of the, talking points that we will be discussing for a long time in this confederation is sort of the disparities that exist between nations within CONCACAF. And so I wanted to ask you specifically about Jamaica, because as you mentioned, they had an incredible World Cup performance back in 2023. They do have the Jamaica Women's Premier League in Jamaica, but they are not represented in this tournament. And of course, we could probably have a whole podcast episode just talking about Jamaica women's football there and the challenges that they face within their federation. But can you sort of explain why they are not included in this CONCACAF tournament?
Absolutely. And yes, having Jamaica qualified to the World Cup in 27 was unbelievable. Their performance in that World Cup was really a great example of what can be accomplished when all things come together properly. And that performance created a tremendous inspiration, not only in Jamaica for young girls to get into the sport, but across the entire Caribbean. So that was fantastic. And there the federation is creating an effort to have a professional league and meet the licensing requirements to be able to compete. Unfortunately, after last year's performance, they weren't able to sustain those requirements and weren't able to meet the criteria to, again, be able to join the competition. The hope is that they can get there. And again, is through those requirements, just simply trying to create the standards necessary for these leagues to be able to compete and continue to advance. As a regional body, we want to make sure that we are able to create sustained and balanced competition. And therefore, there's always that we want to incentivize them to be able to complete at a regional level, and hence why we want to be strict with those parameters and those standards. So that's the reason why on the league side and on the club side, they weren't able to join this competition. Obviously, they will be doing the qualification for the World Cup starting this fall, right. And obviously we expect great things from them given the amount of talent that is in Jamaica.
Yeah, that I think is another broad theme that I think cuts across CONCACAF, is another disparity between the level of talent that exists within these nations and what those national teams and even, at the club level, players are able to do, given the constraints, given the challenges that they face within their federations. So I appreciate you acknowledging that. We would be remiss to not discuss Jamaica, especially since they were involved in the inaugural edition of this tournament. Sort of on the other end of the spectrum, I also want to talk to you about Canada, which is also an interesting sort of story in the context of this W Champions Cup, because there was the Northern Super League did not exist during the last edition of this tournament. And so can you sort of talk about what that sort of looked like from the perspective of CONCACAF in terms of organizing this tournament? Will the qualification pathway in terms of the Northern Super League change for 2026? What's the sort of landscape there, and what sort of conversations were had?
Yeah, look, it's great to see another professional league get off the ground, and given the amount of talent that exists in Canada, it's very natural for that country to have a women's professional league. So seeing the Northern Super League get off the ground and start competition this year is a fantastic development. And we certainly want to see them be able to qualify for this competition through, or clubs qualifying to this competition through that competition. And what we want to see is 2 years of performance and ensuring that the league is continuing to grow and be sustainable in order for clubs from that league to be able to qualify into it. And we expect they will be able to do so very soon. So very hopeful there, very excited that this league has been able to properly launch. And I know for a fact that they're looking forward to being part of this competition.
I bet. And sticking with Canada, just one more question there. There is a youth amateur team that will be competing in this tournament from Vancouver. What do you think that says about this tournament, that they're, especially in these sort of early stages, as you mentioned, some nations are still getting the tools and resources they need to launch fully professional women's leagues. Canada, of course, being a unique case, as you just explained. And yet there's a much younger team competing alongside these professional teams. Everyone is at various stages in their development in terms of their professional leagues. How are you sort of thinking about that in terms of the way that this tournament presents itself to the rest of the world in global women's football?
Yeah, so Canada met the criteria in terms of the existing competition that existed in Canada for this team to qualify and be able to compete in this competition. I think now with the Northern Super League coming online and that professional environment starting to develop, that will be the pathway for qualification into this competition. But given that that league didn't exist, that was the professional or semi-professional environment that existed, and they did meet the criteria in order to be able to qualify into the competition. Hence, why they did so last year, and again this year. Going forward, it will be through the Super League that the qualification path will be determined.
Gotcha. And what about the USL Super League? Do you see pathways for them to qualify, given that they are also Division One?
That's a great question. It's great to see that Super League develop as well. It seems like the first season went incredibly well. They are also very eager to participate in this competition. And that, I think, will be determined through U.S. Soccer as well in terms of how we determine the teams from the U.S. qualifying into this Concacaf W Champions Cup.
Thank you for indulging us. We have a lot of questions about this tournament, as you can tell. But I think this is important. Yeah, and it's important because as these calendars fill, for better or worse, with more competitions, more tournaments, more teams. I mean, the expansion, even within the NWSL, I think could change this conversation if we were to have it before the next version of this tournament. These questions are really important. Let's talk about what is at stake for the teams competing. Because as I said, there are so many competitions. It's hard even for me as a journalist. It's my job to keep up with this. And it is it's heavy sometimes, There's always a new competition being announced. What do teams stand to gain, not only from competing in this tournament, but winning? Especially I'm thinking of younger professional leagues outside of maybe the US, Mexico, Canada. Let's talk about prize money because, money can go a long way, especially in developing a league, supporting players. What is the prize money like for the Concacaf W Champions Cup this year?
Yeah, look, it's an important investment we're making in getting this league, this tournament off the ground, and we foresee that this competition will continue to grow not only in terms of the prize money distribution that we'll be able to put into it, but in terms of also the amount of teams competing, because as we're seeing, there's new environments being developed across the region, new leagues that are starting to really be able to get and meet the standards. In terms of investment today, the winning team makes close to $500,000 in terms of participation and prize money. Okay, and that's a big investment we're making to be able to do so. And what we're seeing also on the commercial side is great interest from existing media partners, from sponsors that are getting behind the competition. And I think through those level of investment, we'll be able to increase that participation and prize money. But more importantly is also the fact that they are able to claim regional supremacy through this official competition and also qualify to a FIFA Club World Cup, right? Not only the annual Club World Cup that will start in 2027, but the Club World Cup that will be played every 4 years, the expanded Club World Cup on the women's side that FIFA announced earlier this year. So that's an incredible opportunity for any club around the world to be able to compete in that competition. So we think it's a tremendous opportunity to be able to not only compete at a regional level, measure yourself against the best in the entire region, potentially claim regional supremacy by becoming the champion, have prize money as part of it, and then qualifying to a FIFA Club World Cup is all incredibly meaningful as part of this competition.
I mean, one of the aspects of your job that I probably envy the least is how you balance growth within this region. I mentioned even at the club level that when you look at leagues like the NWSL, Liga MX Femenil, even the Northern Super League in its very, very early stages, compared to some of these smaller leagues that are even the ones that are professional, much less semi-professional or amateur, we're talking sometimes not only years of difference, sometimes decades, in terms of their abilities to fully develop, starts and stops in some of these smaller countries who are not able to sustain themselves. How do you sort of think about this tournament in terms of what it can offer, team or leagues that have had that chance to develop and mature, like the NWSL, and some of these smaller leagues that are probably looking at this tournament very differently in terms of the potential for visibility, that visibility being able to lead to more resources, being able to lead to players being able to continue their careers elsewhere. I can imagine, for example, that in a league like the NWSL, this tournament can be folded into their season with, relative ease compared to a team in Panama, for example. And when you think about sort of the timing of this tournament, how does that sort of fit into the development that's happening in so many different ways, different paces, different levels of acceleration across the leagues that are competing in this tournament?
Yeah, look, that's an incredible, relevant question because it is the challenge we always face. As I mentioned, we represent 41 member associations across a region. And it's an incredibly diverse region, including football and the development of football within the specific countries that compose this region. And our job as a confederation, as a governing body, is to help each of these federations develop and to meet them where they are in the level of development. And when it comes on the club competition side, is trying to understand how we can help them get to the next level, whether it's really creating a professional league and what are the best practices for doing so and how can they really retain local talent and help local talent continue to advance, or whether it's bringing talent from abroad. And then through our competitions is being able to create that pyramid where you can have a strong competition in terms of balance, and that's figuring out what are the dynamics across the entire region for that to happen, and create an environment of competition where it is really important and meaningful to be a confederation champion. And it's always a fine-tuning exercise. I think in this specific competition on the women's club side, we're going to see our formats continue to evolve because there's going to be more and more clubs wanting to participate, and there's going to be more demand for that. And we think that's fantastic. That's exactly what we want to be seeing. We want the carrot that is being offered through this competition, incentivize our federations to help those local leagues thrive, to help the local talent have a pathway to becoming professional, whether it's within the respective leagues or within leagues in our region. And we think that can really create a very healthy development system across the entire region. I think specifically for the NWSL, the opportunity for talent from our region to develop through this competition and through the programs being established in our federations can really be a fantastic pathway for them to obtain great players and talent into the league. So working hand in hand with WSL, I think we can continue to grow the representation of female players from the Concacaf region.
And is there any concern in particular about the Caribbean who are not represented in this tournament? I know we talked about Jamaica, but I'm also thinking of countries like Haiti, who I know you mentioned when we were talking about the World Cup in 2023. without a fully fledged and resourced professional space, you get, and will I imagine continue to get, players like Melanie du Mornay who are, building their professional careers in France. Is there a specific sort of consideration given to that region within the region in terms of the development?
Absolutely. There's a strong focus in how we can help our federation across the Caribbean help develop women's football overall, right? Whether it's at the national team level, and we think in the Caribbean, the national team ecosystem is probably the right platform for identifying players and developing players. And for those more advanced countries that have the ability to create a professional environment to develop the professional leagues. So we'll focus on those. And then also helping the federations help their specific athletes find the right environment for them to continue to develop, including being outside of that specific country. You mentioned Melanie du Mornay and what she's been able to achieve by playing in Europe and being identified through the national team and playing at the World Cup level. We think that's a fantastic story and one that a lot of girls across the Caribbean can look to and say, that can be me, right? And those specific examples coming out of anywhere in the Caribbean is a possibility. So we certainly embrace those fantastic stories and celebrate them.
And sort of connected to that, my next question is around the topic of player load, because, when these players are playing club football or representing when they have to travel greatly, and this is probably most pertinent with the NWSL, what are the conversations around player load like, especially with all of the travel required within this tournament? Because that, can lead to injuries. This is also happening within club season for a lot of these clubs. So how are you sort of managing that aspect of this competition?
Yeah, that's a great question, and certainly one that we think about a lot. I think the reality when it comes to women's football, the majority of players are not playing enough. They're not being given enough opportunities to develop. And that's our main focus today. Yes, of course, the top players who are advancing deep into the playoffs, that are being represented in their national teams, there is an overload component that needs to be balanced and closely monitored. But if we're thinking about developing the women's game, we have to provide more and more opportunities for competition. And that, I think, right now is the main focus for us from a development perspective.
We have had some pretty explosive news in the last year or so about some of the most expensive transfers in women's soccer history who come from the Concacaf region. Naomi Girma, Olivia Smith. There's recent reports I'm sure you've seen about Jackie Ovalle now joining the NWSL with the Orlando Pride. What does it mean to you that each of those players not only come from CONCACAF, but represent 3 different countries within this confederation? Maybe it's connected to this tournament or not, but when you think about this region as a competitor within global women's football, what does that mean to you?
Well, we don't want to take necessarily credit for it, but it makes us incredibly proud because we recognize the amount of talent that exists in the CONCACAF region and how that talent can fuel women's football in our region to be the best in the world. Whether that's at the NWSL, whether that's at Liga MX, and certainly in the national team environment, which has been proven time and time again with the US winning multiple World Cups. So we certainly want to continue down that path, but on the club side, through this competition, through what's happening in NWSL, through what's happening in Liga MX, and hopefully through what we see happening in other countries across the region, we'll see more and more talent like that continue to be identified. And I think we'll see many, many more of those signings coming out of the CONCACAF region.
All right. Those were, I should clarify, the last questions that I had prepared. But every once in a while, we like to put our guests on the spot when it comes to predictions. So before I let you go, first, if there's anything else that you would like to add about this tournament that you think is important for our listeners to know in terms of why it matters, maybe anything that you're looking forward to. But I'm also personally curious if you are prepared to share any predictions about who you think will win this version of the Concacaf W Champions Cup.
Of course, you're going to put me on the spot with that one. Okay. I'd like to add to our fans watching to please tune in. The tournament starts tonight here in the US. You can follow it through Paramount Plus or CBS Sports Network. On the Spanish language side, you can see it through ESPN en Español. And then obviously there's different broadcasting across our entire region. So there's many opportunities to follow the competition, and it's going to be fantastic. Who's going to win? You're not going to get that from me. I need to remain neutral, and I think we're going to see some great matchups. I think what Gotham FC was able to accomplish winning this competition and how they went into the competition, putting the best foot forward, having a great final in Monterrey against Tigres Femenil was really a showcase, and I think they really elevated what being in this competition means. So we're incredibly thankful for their tremendous effort, and I think they will be hungry to win it again. Right? They're looking forward to hopefully qualifying into their playoffs on the league side, and at the same time they're playing this competition. So hopefully being in this competition allows them to get into their own playoffs through continued performance. So I think we're going to see some great matchups across, and when we crown the next champion in May, I think you're going to see this competition continue to elevate and be more and more visible every year, and that's our aspiration here at CONCACAF.
We will see how this goes. I am not too shy to say that I won't pick a specific team, but I do hope that the winner of the Concacaf W Champions Cup is a non-NWSL team. And I'll just leave it at that. Because to your point about growth, to your point about visibility, to your point about the imperative really to elevate the status of these other professional leagues and semi-professional leagues across this region, I think that, winning talks. And it's a lot easier to get things done as we've seen across the history of women's soccer. So that's my hope. But Filippe, thank you so much for joining us on the show, sharing all of this very important information that people will hopefully take with them as they enjoy these games. And we will be in touch.
Great. Thank you, Tamerra. It's great talking to you. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you at one of our games soon. Okay.
I'd love that.
Follow the competition.
For more on this topic, we welcome in the Athletics' Melanie Anzidei. Hi, Melanie.
Hi. Thanks for having me, guys.
Oh, so lovely to have you. Melanie, the first thing I want to talk to you about is you have reported a lot about player load management for NWSL clubs. How are they gearing up over the next few months to manage now this tournament?
Yeah, so I just now came back from a press conference with Gotham head coach Juan Carlos Amorós, and he did speak a little bit about this. It's an interesting conversation because I reported on this without any reference to the Concacaf W Champions Cup, just specifically targeting the summer tournaments or winter with the CONMEBOL tournament, but all the summer events that kind of were happening with international players, this international calendar, and kind of how players don't really get any time off between the two, and what the NWSL and the team specifically were offering their players. So now here we are talking about this again with a whole nother competition to consider with the Concacaf W Champions Cup. And it's interesting because a lot of what Juan Carlos was talking about was player rotation and how that's going to have to be something that they lean on heavily, especially, looking in the weeks ahead. I believe Gotham has 3 games in 6 days, which feels absurd, but they did the same thing last year. And I'm sure we'll get into it, but I feel like this year they're a little bit more prepared.
And we see this happening across world football. And the truth of the matter is when there's money to be made, the trajectory is not that this is going to change anytime soon. It's just a matter of capping and taking control over how much is added. So when you look at the Concacaf Women's Champions Cup, Melanie and Tamerra, what are your biggest concerns?
Well, one of the things that I asked Filippe about was how CONCACAF manages the very, very different stages that these professional leagues are within the region in terms of their development, in terms of the resources they have and are given, in terms of certainly the level of competition. And I straight up told him, this is probably the aspect of your job that I envy the least, because it's like spinning multiple plates. Each plate has a different size, a different amount of food on it. And yet these plates all need to come together to form a meal. Why do I always make metaphors have to do with food? Well, explore that another time. But he basically said that they have to attend to each club team, each region within CONCACAF very differently. And so my concern, honestly, is a little bit less about disparities on the pitch in terms of the sporting side. It's disparities that might exist in terms of what different teams are going to get out of this tournament. I think if you're an NWSL team, the pro is that, to your point, Melanie, about rotation, this is potentially an opportunity to give some more play time to those who maybe are more likely to come off the bench in an NWSL season game, or maybe not see much playing time at all during the NWSL season. On the flip side, the more you play, and certainly with a lot of the travel that these teams have to do across this tournament, it increases risk of fatigue. Fatigue increases risk of injury. And these are realities that we have to acknowledge. Obviously, we hope that this doesn't happen. But I think my concern, I guess, if I had to boil it down, it is the impact of the player load for some teams, and for those who maybe are not as concerned about player load, what they will actually get out of this tournament.
And I will say, one of the conversations I had with the NWSLPA a few weeks ago following, the return of NWSL players coming from all these international competitions, it was this idea that the calendar is sort of outside of the players' control or even the team's control. Like, they have very little say about this. And last year when this championship, or the Concacaf W Champions Cup, came about, it kind of came up abruptly and to even the league surprise. So there was very little planning up top. This year, fortunately, they have more understanding. They are expecting this. The teams, their medical staff, they're able to plan ahead. And one of the things that the NWSLPA spoke about was that they can't control the calendar, but they can control advocating for things like having proper medical staff, having proper resources for players to help them kind of load and manage their time in a constructive way that keeps them from, obviously the last thing you want is a player to get injured and you want them to last. And it's such a delicate balance because you want, like, if you talk to women's soccer players, they want to be playing more. They want these competitions. They want to have the aspiration for like a Club World Cup in 2028. Like, that's something that they do want. But of course, to grow the game, you need to make sure you're growing it while also giving them the resources to do it correctly.
Yeah, of course, and protecting their bodies, which is how this is all made possible. So obviously, with a tournament just in its second year, there's a lot of concerns, for lack of a better word. But it sounds like the NWSL, at least through this lens, is doing things to improve from year one to year two. When you look at this tournament, big picture though, zooming out of the NWSL lens, Melanie, what are you most excited about, or what are you keeping your eyes on?
I always love seeing diversity in the competition, like seeing players from all over the world. I mean, Tamerra and I had so much fun watching all these different competitions over the summer and like texting about them. So I'm very excited about that. And it will be interesting to see how this grows the games in very different. Obviously, we focus on the NWSL, we focus on the American game, but what does this mean for other people in other parts of America, right? Like, how will they benefit from this? Who will catch the attention of people? Will we see maybe a potential signing from a team that people haven't been paying attention to? So that's what I'm always excited about. Of course, the aspiration is that this becomes like a Champions League of sorts for the region, right? We're not there yet, I don't think, but it is exciting that we're taking the steps towards that, which I think is, an upside to all of this.
I agree. I'm going to be paying close attention to the teams from Panama, Costa Rica, El Salvador. I feel like these tournaments, inevitably, there's going to be a breakout star. I think those are like the gifts that we get from these competitions. Learning about a player who, by the end of a game, you've got Wikipedia tabs open, learning more about them. You're checking out their Instagram because inevitably, there is going to be at least one moment in this tournament where someone scores a crazy banger of a goal or makes an incredible save. And I mean, it's crazy to think about how those moments can change the trajectory of a player's career. It could change their lives, and the ways that that could potentially trickle down to their club, to the league that they play in, the ways that it can affect them at the national team level. I mean, we've seen it so many different times, from the 2023 World Cup to the tournaments that we experienced this summer/winter. And I just know that that's going to happen again. I would love for it to come out of one of those club teams that's participating, because, as Filippe mentioned, their opportunities to showcase their talents on a global stage are few and far between. Hopefully this tournament plays a role in changing that, but now is the time.
That's what it's all about. That's how you get the average fan involved with these breakout stories, these Cinderella teams. So always looking forward to that. I'd love to know from you, Melanie, since you sat in on the Gotham press conference on Tuesday, how do you think that the club point of view differs from the fan point of view as it relates to the glory of this competition?
It's interesting because this match on Wednesday is going to be taking place in Manhattan proper, so to speak. So it's taking place at Icon Stadium and at Roosevelt Island. So it's interesting because while the competition, for fans, they may not be aware of the Concacaf W Champions Cup, what it means, they might not be as familiar with it. It is an opportunity for fans to see their team in a different setting, in Manhattan. And I live in New Jersey, so I forget how hard it is to get to Sports Illustrated Stadium sometimes for some fans, especially in the New York metro area. So I think I'm excited to see if there is a bigger turnout than there was last year at these competitions. I'm wondering if maybe because it's year 2 that fans are more aware, more familiar. I'm wondering with all of these competitions over the summer/winter that now there's more eyes, more appetite. And I think maybe it was really smart of them. Maybe it was necessary to do the game not at Sports Illustrated Stadium, but it's kind of smart to maybe do it at a smaller venue to see if you get new fans turning up for that.
Melanie, what was the reasoning behind these various stadiums for Gotham FC?
I will say, one, it could just be the fact that they do not control their attendant at Sports Illustrated Stadium. So sometimes you have other competitions, you have Red Bull that do play in the same stadium, and you have to compete with those playing times. But also, I do think that from a marketing perspective, the team wants to have their visibility elsewhere, because they are NJNY Gotham FC. So while they play in New Jersey all the time, they do have a fan base in New York. And another conversation for another podcast, but I'm always curious to see where Gotham will end up in the future. Is Sports Illustrated their home forever? We don't know. So maybe this is a way for them to kind of test these different markets, see where the interest is, see what other stadiums are out there and what other options are there for them.
Ooh, that's definitely a podcast for another day. I've already got my wheels turning about where I'd love to watch them play, in addition to Harrison, New Jersey. All right, anything else we're missing?
I think we've covered as much as we can, short of the games themselves. I think for the NWSL teams competing, they're all sort of in very interesting positions right now. Orlando, Gotham, the Spirit. So in some ways, I think that can actually, if I'm, playing against any of those NWSL teams, it's easy, I think, on paper to be bracing yourself, for battle. But they're all kind of in a vulnerable position in their own way. So I think that actually is going to serve this tournament really well in terms of the actual competition, which I know we haven't talked too much about yet. There's not too much to say. But I like that it's sort of balancing out some of the parity, and I really feel like that's going to show up on the field.
Yeah.
Perfect. Melanie, Tamerra, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That does it for our show today. And in case you didn't know, The Athletic has partnered with Yahoo Sports to provide free, best-in-class coverage of women's sports. Go ahead. Go check out the Women's Sports Hub at sports.yahoo.com/women-sports. That link, of course, is in the show notes for you as well. I'm Jillian Sakovits. You'll be hearing from me a few more times throughout the month, but until the great Meg Linehan returns. And as always, just remember, full-time does not happen without our podcast producer, Theo Lloyd-Hughes, our video producer, Leah Griffin, and our executive producer, Emily Olsen. Enjoy the chaos. We'll see you very soon.